Roachmill was an ongoing series that launched during the black and white boom of the mid-1980s. This brief time period is a topic worth a deeper dive, but for now, it's enough to say that before mainstream comics exploded and became a speculator's fantasy, the independent black and white market had its own success story. For a few years, between roughly 1984 and 1986, if you could put together 24 pages of comic art, you would probably find a publisher. That's exactly what creators Rich Hedden and Tom McWeeney did after graduating from the Joe Kubert School. According to McWeeney, quote, "Rich showed me a sketch of this scraggy-looking guy dressed all in black with 4 guns and a pair of creepy bug arms. He told me the basic premise, that he was an exterminator in the future who could be legally hired to exterminate anybody or anything. So you could have him come to your house and deal with your termites or take out your noisy neighbor." Unquote. From there, the pair did various sketches, attended comic conventions, and sold the idea to Blackthorne Publishing. After that, they worked on story ideas for a few months, before producing the first issue in late 1986. As for who did what, Hedden was the artist, and McWeeney did the inks, although everything was credited to both of them. Perhaps the best description of Roachmill comes from McWeeney, quote, "Roachmill is part Dirty Harry, part 50s detective novel, and part Warner Brothers cartoon set in a future version of New York City overrun by crime and populated with various alien races." Unquote. The history of Roachmill is somewhat brief. It ran for 6 bi-monthly issues at Blackthorne, before moving to Dark Horse for an additional 10 issues that were published on a very irregular schedule. The series opens with Roachmill being charged with murder, which is ironic considering he's a professional exterminator and killing is legal. However, he's apparently killed someone without a contract, so that's technically murder. Roachmill is locked up, but he escapes with the help of Wyme and Muzzy, both of whom will become his reasonably inept apprentices later on. During the escape, Roachmill is wounded, but he's able to heal and hide out with his friend Boyle. Once he's mobile again, Roachmill tracks down who framed him for murder. Despite uncovering the conspiracy, he's brought to trial anyway. During the trial, he sneaks out of prison, and in one night, Roachmill threatens every jury member before returning to his cell. This less than subtle persuasion gets him a verdict of not guilty. The 4th issue finally fills in some details of the world. In the distant future, Earth opened itself up to immigration from other worlds. Earth was then flooded with aliens, and this led to riots. Law enforcement couldn't handle the situation, so a law was passed allowing anyone with a firearm to, air quotes, handle alien-related problems. This eventually led to the business of pest control and exterminators. Some exterminators work for a corporation, while others, like Roachmill, are independent. Regardless of status, exterminators are there to take care of any pest-related issues. Bugs, mice, former lovers, roaches, or noisy neighbors. If you have the cash, that pest can be eliminated. It's a rather heavy satire of immigration and gun control. In the final issue, Roachmill is hired to eliminate a costume vigilante that's messing with organized crime. Oddly, the story ends on a cliffhanger. This short series is a very good introduction to the characters and the world of Roachmill. It's essential reading for anyone invested in the character. Dark Horse Presents 17 wraps up the story that began in the final issue of the Blackthorne series. There's also a few extra pages of background information for anyone new to the character. This is Roachmill's proper debut at Dark Horse, and it acts as a bridge between the previous series and the new one. In fact, the entire issue is dedicated to Roachmill, which was highly unusual for that anthology title. So Dark Horse must have had a lot of faith in that series. The 10-issue series is quite uneven, and there were huge gaps in its publishing schedule. For tone, it's all over the place. The first few issues are a rescue mission set in space, and it does nothing to introduce new readers to the character or setting, which seems like an odd choice for a rebooted series. But for the first time, Roachmill is hired to eliminate an actual pest problem, not an individual. The next 2 issues are a straight-up parody, similar to Mad Magazine, with, I suspect, a dash or two of the magazine cartoons added for good measure. It's over the top, self-aware, and completely ridiculous. We're also introduced to Zulu, a renegade exterminator who bears no small resemblance to the Joker. The issue acknowledges that obvious similarity. The plot is all over the place. Basically, it's every bad 80s action movie crammed into 2 issues. It's at the extreme end of the satirical or parody spectrum. It seems out of place with what came before and what happens next. There's a 4-issue story that's very downbeat and mature. There's some typical craziness, but the majority of the story is rather serious, especially the dream sequences, which hint at a very dark beginning for Roachmill. The final 2 issues once again become a zany mess. Roachmill is hired to exterminate a science experiment gone wrong. He ends up competing against Captain Killhappy, a SWAT team leader who's a shoot first, ask questions later type of guy. The story doesn't end, it just stops. Literally, the story stops, and the creators insert themselves to bemoan the fact that the comic isn't what they envisioned. This abrupt ending ties into a blurb in the 5th anniversary issue of Dark Horse Presents. The blurb states the creators put the series on hiatus to take Roachmill in a new, more serious direction. However, that hiatus never ended, and Roachmill never returned, at least not as a series. The character would make one final appearance in Dark Horse Presents number 139, before disappearing completely. First of all, the artwork is just astounding, especially for 2 young artists fresh out of school. It might not be fully formed in places, but it is pretty close. The use of shadow and light to give it a noir edge, while still looking science fiction-y, is quite impressive. To me, I got a very Bernie Wrightson vibe to the majority of the inking. There's also some rather inventive 2-page spreads, where the action intuitively flows from one panel to the next. Also, the lettering has to be mentioned. It was rather well done in general, and used to indicate character. For example, Roachmill's word balloons are squared and irregular, which makes his dialogue stand out. Boyle's lettering is slightly larger than everyone else's, indicating not only his larger size, but the fact that he probably speaks a little louder than necessary. Of course, there's Zulu, whose word balloons are loopy and filled with symbols and mismatched letters, like a ransom note. As a design element, the lettering is perfect. The setting feels like an even dirtier version of Blade Runner. That's a very noticeable element about the world of Roachmill. It looks and feels very lived in. You're immediately immersed in a place that feels real. There are little touches, like the amusing graffiti everywhere, that makes it feel like it's existed for some time. It's also populated, with crowds and background characters filling up all available space. It definitely feels like a world that's overrun and overpopulated. Along the same lines, I'd compare the comic to RoboCop or possibly American Flag. Both take place in a dystopian future where media is very present and influential. That satirical element runs through Roachmill. It's very media aware, and it has a dim view of its influence. The only criticism is the series never found a consistent tone or direction to follow. The contrast between slapstick and drama didn't work very well. Unlike Bone or Cerebus, Roachmill never found a balance between the amusing parts or the over-the-top satirical portions and the more serious story beats. The unfortunate part is it could have leaned in one direction or the other, and either approach would have been suitable. For those wondering, Roachmill doesn't have an origin story. We do learn through implication. His mother was assaulted by an insect alien, and Roachmill is the product of that forced union. Otherwise, there's no inciting incident or call to action. It's his environment that made him what he is. In the end, Roachmill is an interesting commentary about the late 80s and the violent entertainment that had become popular. It's also a good time capsule of what was going on in independent black and white comics. There's a zeal and energy to the comic that is uncommon. Regardless of any criticism, it's always a pleasure to see a creative team enjoy what they're doing. Thank you for watching. Before you leave, please give this video a like, leave a comment, or share it on some other platform. If you're not subscribed, maybe do that too. The past month was pretty rough for this channel, and I could definitely use your support. A link to my Patreon is down below, and I would greatly appreciate if you would back my humble efforts. My goal is to do this full time and produce even more work, but I have unfortunately fallen past the halfway point in reaching that goal. There are a lot of projects I'd like to do, but I'm not at a point where I can do them. So that's my pitch. With that said, thanks to all my fine supporters on YouTube and Patreon. I highly appreciate that ongoing support. You do make it possible for this channel to continue, and I cannot stress that enough. Thank you so very, very much. Extra special thanks to Sequin, Francis De La Cruz, John Nyukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Phil Sagan, Corey Drew, L.S. Greger, Alexa Zernish, Brian Deaton, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient. Until next time, hopefully.